All right, welcome. Today, we're going to unpack a really complex human story that's kind of hidden inside an academic study on climate change. It's a story about land, it's about water, and it's about one of the toughest decisions a family could ever have to make. Do you stay, or do you leave everything you've ever known behind?
Okay, so let's jump right in with a really crucial fact. A whopping 70% of Afghans live and work in rural areas. I mean, think about that. For them, life is completely tied to the land. We're not just talking about a job here. Farming is the historical and cultural backbone of the entire country. It's the main way millions of people survive.
But here's the thing. That land is changing, and it's changing fast. Get this. Between 1951 and 2010, Afghanistan actually warmed by 1.8 degrees Celsius. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but it's way more than the global average. And that, of course, puts just immense pressure on their water resources. This is really the central tension of the whole story we're telling today.
So, first up, we're going to explore this harsh environmental reality. What actually happens when the very ground that a whole society depends on, the land that provides literally everything, starts to crack under the strain of a changing climate.
Just let that sink in for a second. 61%. That means for more than half of all households in the entire country, their income is completely at the mercy of the weather. So when the rains don't come, it's not just a bad season. No, it's an economic catastrophe. It literally threatens the survival of whole communities.
And this isn't some new problem. Severe droughts have been a recurring crisis there for decades. But what's really changed is just how often they happen and how bad they are when they do. They're not just these isolated events anymore. They become a permanent and worsening part of the climate.
So, faced with this reality, people don't just throw up their hands and leave. Not at all. The research actually shows this incredible story of resilience and adaptation. So this next part, it's all about that struggle. It's about the fight to stay on their land against just incredible odds.
So what does that fight actually look like on the ground? Well, families basically have this whole toolbox of strategies they use to survive. They're trying every single tactic they can think of just to make it through another season.
They do everything they possibly can, right there on the farm. They'll switch to planting crops that can handle the drought. They'll change up their planting schedules, hoping to catch whatever little rain might fall. They manage every single drop of water so carefully. And then, when things get really desperate, they have to start selling off to precious assets, livestock, tools, anything just to get by.
And look, these are all really smart, necessary adaptations. But there's a limit, right? There's only so much a family can handle when the drought is just relentless, year after year.
And eventually, well, that's just not enough. When that limit is finally reached, when every single coping strategy has been tried and the fields are still just dust, that's when families are forced to consider a much, much more drastic and life-altering option.
And that brings us right to the core question of all this. What's the final tipping point? What is it that truly makes a family decide to up and leave everything behind? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is nowhere near as simple as you might think.
Okay, so to get a handle on this decision, we can start with a classic idea called the push and pull theory. It's pretty straightforward. You can think of it like a stick and carrot kind of thing. Some factors are pushing you away from your home, while other factors are pulling you toward a new place.
So in Afghanistan, the push factors are incredibly powerful. You've got severe drought, you've got crop failure, and that constant threat of instability. But the pull factors are just as strong. Things like the hope of finding a job in a city, the promise of just having access to water, and maybe the stability you could get from having family in another place.
But that's not the only way to look at this. There's another theory. It's called the New Economics of Labor Migration, or NELM for short. And what's interesting here is that it reframes this whole decision. It's not seen as just a desperate escape, but more like a calculated family business move. It's a strategy to minimize risk and hopefully maximize income.
Now, this brings up a really fascinating idea, right? Viewing migration as a logical economic strategy. So a family might actually get together and decide to send one person away, not because everyone's starving right then and there, but as an investment. The idea is that person can go earn money, send it back home, and basically create a financial safety net for the entire family.
But, as the research makes crystal clear, the reality on the ground in Afghanistan is way more complicated than any single theory can explain. It's definitely not just a simple calculation of climate plus cash.
The answer, probably not surprising to you, is a firm no. The decision to move, or, and this is just as important, the decision to stay, is tangled up in this complex web of really local and personal factors.
Because think about it, in the real world, you've got decades of conflict to deal with. The journey itself costs money, which many people don't have. And there are these incredibly deep cultural ties to their ancestral land. All of these things can completely change the equation. Sometimes they can actually outweigh the drought, either pushing a family to leave or making it totally impossible for them to go, even if they want to.
And this illustrates a tragic irony that researchers call maladaptation. It's when the very attempt to adapt, in this case by moving, ends up making the family's situation even worse. I mean, they might end up in an urban slum with no job, buried in debt from the journey, and actually more vulnerable than they were back home.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute and see what this specific case in Afghanistan tells us about a much bigger, growing global issue. Because let's be clear, this story is definitely not unique to one country.
And what this does is it shifts our whole perspective, right? We need to stop seeing climate migration as just some desperate reflex. It's a complex human calculation. A lot of the time, it's a strategic choice made by totally rational people who are just facing impossible circumstances.
And this brings us to a final and pretty provocative thought. We tend to focus all our attention on the people who leave, on the migrants. But what this research suggests is that the most vulnerable people of all might actually be those who are trapped, the ones who don't have the money, the ability, or the freedom to move. They're the ones left behind to face a future with even fewer options. And that's something to really think about.